It's good to see you in person once again. Um, yeah, I just kind of came to church today, and I walked in, and as I saw you guys spill into the chapel, I was like, oh my gosh, people are coming today, and it's just kind of nice to see. I kind of like blanked out that people are coming today, and so it was like a surprise. Anyway, I'm getting old now, so I'm getting so forgetful. And I have many funny but not so funny stories of me forgetting stuff, like leaving my phone in the deep freezer in the garage and looking for the phone all evening. Having said all that stuff, that's neither here or there, but we wanted to, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we wanted to preach on the book of Amos. And there are many things in here that is very useful for us as we go through this pandemic. And last week I shared with you that financially speaking, pandemic has been good for me because, and I mentioned that I didn't make more money, but I don't go out, we don't travel, and et cetera. But now that I realize I got a generous gift from church, so yeah, I'm doing even gooder, as I usually say. But there are people who are not doing gooder, and they're doing worse. And right now, a lot of the conversation has been about, is our worship going to be virtual or physical? Is it going to be hybrid, or is it going to be like no hybrid? Zoom is going to be canceled and we're just going to do physical service and things like that. So I feel that there's a conversation around our measuring of our spirituality and our relationship with God, largely based on, are you here physically or are you not here physically? Have you been at church during this entire COVID, or have you only logged in through Zoom? And if you haven't been at church, then the sentiment is, whoa, like chillax. You go grocery shopping, your kids go to school. So what's the big deal coming to church to worship God? And I've seen that argument and ideas being floated around. And I wonder if there's another way for us to think about our relationship with God during this pandemic, rather than just virtual versus physical. Okay, and how many times have you been at church? And that is, as we have been praying, how should we return to God after a pandemic? Should we return to God when all the vaccines have rolled out and the numbers have dipped completely and everyone's back here and everything just goes back to normal? Or should we take heed of the prophet Amos and literally just remember the poor? In short, like, let us gather together to this worship place with the poor and the needy in our heart. Whether you are worshiping at home virtually and you never came to church in person during the entire COVID or not, at one point where we do return and we're all gathered together, let us return to the Lord, not only in format or frame of worship, virtual versus physical, but let us gather together to remember the poor. And that's one of the things that we want to really emphasize, that if there's anything that is teaching us, if there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, is that there are people who are in need, and there are people who are struggling. And it's not good enough to measure our relationship based on physical versus virtual gathering, but that we have in our heart refugees and people who are struggling during this time. So this is, in the light of that, I would like to invite all Bridgeway people to have in their heart to love and to be generous and to visit and begin to think about how can I help? Because in this story, you have in Israel, they didn't worship in Jerusalem because the kingdom has been separated. So two main places of worship is Gilgal and Bethel. And their worship there is lively. Worship there is, it had such a pomp. And people announced their gifts. People were tithing rigorously. Israel was in the height of financial stability. They had summer houses, winter houses, and these things were in fad. They never had this kind of wealth before. And it is absolute fad to get these extra homes in the countryside for the rich and get in ivory beds into every single one of them so that they can enjoy and relax. And worship could not have been better. There is more wealth in the temple that they probably have ever seen before. And yet, God says, return to me. Return to me, return to me, return to me. He brought pestilence and war. He brought all kinds of things that would wrench the rich people's heart. The things that they were doing to the poor, God would do to them so that they would empathize with those who are suffering. And he would say, return to me, come back to me. And there's one fascinating verse in there where he says, I would make rain come down on one city and not the other. God is saying, wealth is from me. I have sovereignty over your material resources. If you trust me, then you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and you shall have enough for all of you to eat. And yet they would not return. But ironically, their worship is better. Their worship is better, but they're not returning to the Lord. And this is the point that I'm trying to make here. How should we return to the Lord after the pandemic? We will have greater numbers of people in here. Maybe the offering trend will continue or get better, and we'll just have more offering, and the church will get richer. And people will be happier because we're all gathering together. We can finally eat again, and we can do events again and retreats again. And yet I would think, as all the vibrance of our worship and joy and fellowship increases, I felt that the Lord would say, return to me. And then I would just simply say to the Lord, but we have returned to you. We're all here. Look at all these faithful people. We have all returned here and we want to worship you. Now, I want to make it very clear that I'm not preaching this because I think Bridgeway is some sort of materialistic, filled with materialistic people oppressing the poor and I don't know, taking money away from people who really need. No, this is not where I'm going with this, and that's not the underlying motivation for this sermon. But it really is about how can we truly worship God? What is true worship? And how can we be salt and light in the world? And not because we're in a great sin, as in we see in the woman of Bashan. Now, I can't say that word properly because today, Bashan will be pronounced Bashan. Yeah, and forever at Bridgeway, it would be called Bashan. Bashan, the cows, Amos says, and he calls woman of Israel cows of Bashan. And Bashan is a rich, fertile land where they had so much grass that it was famous for their Kobe beef. No one laughed, that's okay, but that's where they get their prime AAA beef. And I don't know if you've ever been to countries where you see cows roaming around and they're gaunt. But in Bashan, cows are like plump, and that's where you got the meat. And when Amos said, you cows of Bashan, it wasn't an insult, as you and I would think as a modern readers. Oh, like, how dare you call me a cow? I'm a woman of distinguished, publicity and whatever else. No, it's a compliment. to be called a cow was a compliment, because a lot of power and influence and glory was exemplified by a cow. Remember the idolatry of when people came out from Egypt, they worshipped a golden calf, right? So to call them a cows of Bashan was a great compliment. But Amos, being Amos, he turns it around and says, one day you shall be carried away on fish hooks. And I think he's probably prophesying about Assyrians coming to take them away, literally on hooks, because that's what Assyrians did. They would hook the prisoners of war and take them away. And he's saying, you are glorious now, but just like the cows, that you will be put in a basket, that you will be consumed, because you don't understand that wealth comes from me. You think wealth is yours. So what is the sins of these women? The sin of this woman is that they have crushed and oppressed the poor. And when you look at these verses, you really have to read between the lines, and I guess other sources would really help. But what does it mean to crush the poor? It means that you ask for things that are essential to them. So let's say somebody owes you $10,000, and they can only pay you back $9,000 right now, and there's $1,000 outstanding. So instead of waiting and chopping those into payments and working out a payment plan, they would say things like, well, give me your kid, give me your coat, give me your house, give me the only goat that you have that is source of your protein and milk and stuff like that. They ask for things that are essential and are important, and things that if we're taken away would bring them shame or break their heart, or it would prevent them from getting back up again. That's what crushing means. That you become so self-centered, so self-absorbed, that you become so exclusive that you cannot give the poor a fighting chance to live another day, because you need an ivory bed right now, because you need to upgrade something right now. And God took great offense to the way that they demanded necessity, the way that they used their position, the way that they used their rights, and the way that they have crushed the poor. The thing is, wealth in and of itself is not evil, and we know that, because we all have some sort of wealth accumulating in our bank account or our pocket, and we utilize and resource wealth all the time. We enjoy wealth, disposable income, wealth to buy us house and put our kids through school and go out for Chipotle, or we call it Chipotle, and it's great. But if wealth is making you exclusive, if wealth is beginning to make you and define you, and is making you think about what you're going to buy next, what you can get next, and what you must do to earn wealth, and if this is cutting into your life, and you can't think of anyone else, but you're just thinking about, you're not doing anything evil, by the way, but you're just thinking about how I'm gonna earn greater wealth, then your heart is now exclusive. And we can't compare ourselves to cows of Bashan, of course, but then the seed is sown that we're starting to be like them. We have the same sentiment as them. One of the things that women ask for, and is they tell their husband, bring that I may drink. And I won't get into too much of that, although we're not going to cover it at Live Devo, so maybe I'll just mention it. The language and the tone and the culture, the way that women say, bring me wine to their husband, is that they're slave. You're talking to them like a slave. And I'm not saying patriarchal society is the way to go, but and men should never serve women. But that's not what the text is saying. The text is saying that these women have gained so much wealth that even in the most intimate relationship that they have with her husband, it has become a slavery. Bring that I may drink. And the further issue is that I just took the things that are necessary for you to live your life, but I'm going to get drunk. I'm going to enjoy my life. That there's indifference and detachment. And this is something that I sometimes think about in my own life, that I can't fully, and I really struggle with this because sometimes I think I'm just bringing myself into a guilt, but we should have some sort of longing and attachment to the poor. That if our life is, how can I create more wealth for myself? And you're not doing anything evil once again. And then how can I use that wealth to gain more pleasure and enjoyment? If that's your heart and your life, then I encourage you to return to the Lord. I encourage you to examine this worship that you are having right now and you're giving to the Lord. And I really want all of us to think about this as we come back to Bridgeway, to this address, when all things open up and everything goes back to normal. That we ought to return to God with true worship. The heart that says, I make wealth, yes, I enjoy wealth, yes, but they're not all for me. They're not all for me. That I must surrender these things so that I may worship true God, because God is love, and if I don't love, I don't know God. And my piety and my spirituality is empty and is sham. It's not life-changing spiritual life that God has promised. It's not that at all. So, Bridgeway, as we celebrate, as we vote on our budget this year, and we have become richer than we have ever been as a past. And if we just keep getting more wealth in our bank account, I think as a pastor, as leaders, as church, as Christians, I think this is sin. And we need to figure out to open up the tithing and storage, the doors of a storage room, so that we may share our wealth. It's so okay. Let's get a little bit more practical. There are many things, and not all of them will apply to you, but I would like to encourage you to just maybe take one out of these many. Okay, one is that, do you abuse your power? And that's something that we all, including myself, we all need to think about. Do we abuse our power? Do we abuse our power to oppress the needy, oppress those who are structurally are under us and below us? And we need to think about that. And you might not be like a boss of your firm or partner or whatever, but maybe you do that when you go to a restaurant, to a server or a bus driver or somebody who is, getting minimum wage and they're serving you. So I encourage you to think about that. Do I abuse my power and my position? Or do I see this as a place to bless others and to be a humble servant? Okay, and this happens with moms and dads too, and older brothers and older sisters. They kind of see the younger brother or their children as someone that they can just talk whatever to. Okay, and secondly, I want us to think about, do you connect with God through loving others or just merely through attending worship? Okay, that you connect with God through sermon, you connect with God through music, and you connect with God through like hanging out with people and talking about the word and things like that. Or do you really connect with God through loving others and being generous to them? Okay. So essentially, we all have to think about, do I give? Do I give and do I care? because what God does here is that he sent his son and he became nothing for us. Paul says that, when he talks about love offering, Paul says, give because Christ became poor, basically. In other words, Christ didn't use his power and his position to abuse us, but he became nothing for us. He gave us the preferential treatment. And that was his worship to God. That was his way of honoring God, that he became nothing and he forgave. And when we look at our Savior in that way, that he restores sinners' heart by humbling himself, then perhaps this is one of the things that you and I can pray for, that we pray for a humble heart, that we restore others through humility. But there's more than that to this story. God doesn't just bend over backwards and say, I'm going to love you no matter what. But God does bring judgments over and over and over. And he has final judgment for Israel. Let us take this to our heart, that God is not a fluffy, manga anime character with big, big eyes who says, I will love you no matter what. And that's like one of those hearts and, like blow kisses. But he will not be mocked. And know that if you are in special relationship with God, that he will discipline us. That if you call yourself Christian, he will discipline all of you because of the name that you bear. And not only he will discipline you, and so that we will discipline us, so that we will all return to him. But then ultimate blessing that God gives to us is that he reveals his heart to us. He reveals his mind to us. And this is a final application to all of you for you to think about. So like I said, I gave a lot of applications today. I know it's confusing, but I just wanted to see, I felt that maybe one of these will catch you today. Final application to you is that you study the mind and thought of God through reading the Word. He wants to reveal his thought. He wants to reveal himself. That's what that means. That he is a loving God, he's a humble God, and he is God who loves, and he lays down he gave his son to us, and he is calling all of us to love. And in the face of knowing God's thought, that he wants us to love and take care of the needy. And that worship in here, the vibrancy of our worship here in terms of finance, of the ministries, is not measure of our spiritual intimacy with God, but it's the way that we love others. That is a litmus test. If that's the case, then do you study and do you meditate and do you work out these thoughts that are of God? Am I saying this right? Basically, study the Word until you love God through loving others. Right? Study the Word. You don't know the thought of God until you love God by loving your neighbor as yourself. And that's really the crux of it. Do you know his thoughts? And okay. Let us return to this location and let us celebrate the grace of God because we love God through loving others. Let's not measure our, for lack of a better word, our spiritual success or health through the fact that I came here more faithfully than anyone else during the pandemic, or now I'm back at this location physically. And I really want to you know, for those of you who never came to Bridgeway to church during the entire pandemic, I just want to say this to you: don't feel guilty. Don't feel like you failed. But do work on your fear. I mean, that's for sure. If that's what's preventing you and you're always kind of anxious, you know, just surrender that to God, and, you know, work through that. But rather than measuring yourself through that, I really want you to pray about visiting and helping others and asking God the courage to really just love somebody near you. And just stop measuring yourself based on whether you joined us through virtually or you came here physically. I really want to set you free from that guilt, at least. Okay. And we would love, and all of us should welcome everyone, regardless of our worship format during the pandemic. So let us be a church that loves and help the needy. Okay. That's it. Let us pray together.